Hey, thank you very much. Now, how is the sound? I'm always one, I can't see that well, I can't hear that well. Lift it up. How is that? Okay, so I am absolutely overwhelmed by the radiance of this group. I could, the minute I walked in, I was like, this is where the world changes. So, Village to Village Network, I am so honored, and I admire the work that you're doing, one person at a time. And so in a nutshell, as you just heard, I am a gerontologist, so I study aging, and I worked at the university for 20 years. I was tenured. I had no intent of leaving. I felt really grateful. But like all of you pioneers, I started to think, wait a minute, we're in the ivory towers doing all of this, but what's going on out in the world? And so basically what I want to share with you today, and I know that you've been listening a lot, so I hope this feels more interactive than just listening, but we want to talk about aging brilliantly. And so it matters to the people that you work with, but also what every one of us shares is that we're aging together, and that there is incredible heterogeneity in how we go about that process. So I'm going to try to advance this. Do you see a different picture now? Yes. Okay, so my retina is detached about a year and a half ago, and I couldn't see, and so ever since my vision has come back from all these surgeries, I now can't stand trying to read tiny font on slides, so you're going to see primarily pictures. So hopefully, that's why I was glad that you could hear. So aging brilliantly is the kind of thing, how do you quantify it? We know it when we see it, we feel it, we're surrounded by it. And I thought that I would start with good news. So I'm going to start with 2 bits of good news, and then I'm going to go to 2 parts of bad news. These are all things you already know, but it's kind of good together to go through them. So let's start with some good news. It's in your brain right now. So as we get older, the trajectory of the neurological integration of our left and right hemisphere is closer than ever. Okay, and so what that means is when you have your brain integrated with the left side and the right side, it impacts problem solving. So many things will decline and change for us. For example, finding somebody's name, remembering why the heck you opened the refrigerator, all these kinds of things. But this really important strength that we gain all the way up until we're 120 is problem solving. And I could show you these charts and these studies, but actually the way that you'll get it right away is if I tell you a story. I have a friend who lives back east, and his name is Gene Cohen. He's an MD, PhD geriatrician. He unfortunately has passed away, but when he was alive, he told me that every Tuesday he would pick up his parents who were in their later 90s at the subway station. And every Tuesday they'd get into his car, he'd go home, they'd have dinner, and then he would drive them home. So one day he's at work and he's running late, and it's just a snowstorm that's dumping snow. So his parents get off and they're walking, dumping, and it was before the ubiquitous cell phone era, so they didn't have any phones with them. So they're standing there waiting for their dumb son to come from Harvard. And they look over and they see a pizza place. So they walk over to the pizza place and they say, "We'd like to order a pizza. And when we do, and when you deliver it, we'd like to ride along in the car with it." So see how you get it right away? The point is that we've been around for a long time. In our 90s, we can pull from life experiences and this biological, neurological integration of our left and right hemisphere to come up with solutions that a 20-year-old is simply not going to come up with. we forget that we have this skill because we have succumbed to the societal norm that because we're not using Snapchat every day that we don't know things. But in fact, like the biggies, can you imagine a country where villages would come together and use that collective problem solving? It would be staggering, and that's what gives me hope for our nation, is to be able to draw upon the wisdom of our current super seniors and our future selves. So that's one piece of very good news, problem solving. Okay, I keep putting stuff down. Okay, the next thing that's good news is not this. It's not that good of news. Okay, the next bit of news is good news, is that you become more you. Okay, so you show me an 18-month-old, and we all know what he's doing. He's opening the cupboards, he's pulling stuff out. We know what that guy's doing. Show me now an 81-year-old. He could be doing anything. He can be more himself. So it's good and it's bad, right? So it can be good because people like you who are radiant will only become more so. And in giving that message out, that we really have this opportunity to become more ourselves. We might look more similar, but in fact, and so that's why as part of what I do, I go to a lot of funerals, and I actually really like them. And I am blessed to hear how people become more themselves, more unique, more quirky, more whatever they are. And to me, that's really good news, unless you're really crabby, and then that's really bad news. Okay, now I told you I'd tell you two good news things, right? Problem solving and becoming more you. Now let's go to two bad things. Ageism. You know this. The world has a problem, particularly the United States, particularly California, particularly Southern California. You know, we're in the epicenter. And I gave a talk to a group of fourth graders a couple of years ago. And it was an opportunity to talk to kids about aging. And in my mind, because like I'm not with kids as often, I had this whole you know how you picture something and I'm gonna talk to the kids and we're gonna say aging is great and so I go, okay, boys and girls, what happens when you get older? And then they all raised their hands. And so I thought they were gonna say, you know, your hair gets gray, or I thought they might say, you know, your skin gets a little less firm. Instead, I call on the first kid and he goes, you get ugly. And so, you know, all the administrators are sitting around thinking this is the worst learning thing ever. So then I go to the next, I thought, well, maybe it's because it's a boy. Let me call upon a girl. So I'm going to look for a cute little girl to call on, and I see all the kids putting their hands down because that's what they were going to say. So the thing about it is we have been brainwashed since the time we were born through popular media, through a multi-billion-dollar anti-aging industry that is not going anywhere, that it is bad to get older, that it is somehow we've got to fight it. And it is simply not true, because the research shows us we become more spiritual. We have greater resilience, our humor. So they're making money based on fear. And so it's not going to come, I don't think, from an aha moment from a 21-year-old. It's going to come from us as we age saying, yeah, this is what 84 looks like. You know, it comes from what you guys are doing right now, which is charting the path for not only your best life, but the best life of your village, and ultimately as it spreads, you know, our entire nation and hopefully the world. So what does ageism look like? It looks the woman on the top, I mean, what could be more beautiful? What could be more radiant than a life lived? You want to just go out and have a cup of coffee there together? And then this other woman who, you can understand, I'm not blaming her either. I'm understanding of the message sinking in too much, that if only I could get this neck up here and these things would stop blowing in the wind, then things would be better. Okay, so the next topic is something you all know far, far too well because you're combating it every single day so successfully. And that is the hidden epidemic of loneliness. So a study out of UCLA asked people about loneliness. The loneliness, I want to differentiate. It doesn't matter if you're alone, physically alone. That doesn't mean you're lonely. And you can be in a crowd and be lonely. So the definition of it is wanting more social connection than you currently have. So it's different from everyone. So just because someone lives alone doesn't mean they're necessarily lonely. And just because someone's been married for 1 million years doesn't mean they're not lonely. So research is finally catching up with what you've known all along, and that is the incredible physiological ramifications from chronic loneliness. So as you can see up on the screen, it's impacting almost a 30% increase in coronary artery disease and cardiovascular diseases, increased risk in stroke. Then the shocker, 64% increase in the risk of developing cognitive impairment or dementia. What? If there was a drug that did this, we would all be running for the hills to get it. And yet, what you're creating through the villages is that, which is connecting humans to enable people not to experience chronic loneliness. And then, with all variables held constant, those who are chronically lonely have a almost 26% increase in mortality. So it's actually literally killing us. So I love this former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. He was a champion of loneliness, and then he was fired, and that broke my heart. But I still love him. And what he said was, during my years caring for patients, the most common pathology I saw was not heart disease or diabetes, it was loneliness. People are starting to catch on, and it's starting, I'm sure you've seen, that we're starting to talk about it in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, on CNN and PBS. We're starting to talk about it, that it's not a shame kind of thing. Because it's traditionally been like, how are you lonely? No, I'm fine. But I think it's another thing that when we come forward and say, very common for humans, we have to sleep, we have to eat, we need to connect. And that mechanism will be different for different people, but we really do need it in different formats. Ew, your brain. So, I want to talk about what happens, about why loneliness, like how this happens physiologically. Okay, and I also wanted to show this up so you wouldn't get too hungry for lunch. So, bam. If you think about where the green slide and the red slide intersect, that's a part of the brain called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And that part of the brain is activated when we are in physical pain. So these guys in physical pain, I can give the analogy of, we have 3 kids, and when I was having one of them who's almost a 10-pounder, there's a lot of physical pain, and the scale. So for a woman, physical pain would be, if we rated about a 6, that would be a man's 10. There's kind of I know we're in a mixed group, so I was trying to kind of equate it for you guys. So when you're in physical pain, this part of your brain that I'll call the DAC for short is stimulated. When that part of the brain is stimulated, this is what occurs. You lose interest and initiative. You feel disagreeable and angry. You have hyperfocus and you lose energy. So, like, again, back to my pregnancy moment there before the blessed epidural came, I was hyper-focused on my husband's gum chewing. Like, you gotta stop that. I didn't have any energy. I was very crabby and it was a physiological. I was in pain. It stimulated that part of the brain, and that's natural, right? Well, guess what they found out with chronic loneliness? When somebody is going through bouts of, years of, decades of chronic loneliness, that is having less interaction than they would have liked, less interaction than when they were teaching school, or when they were getting 6 kids ready for school, or when they were the big cheese in their office, or when they were out with their colleagues digging ditches, all these social things that we've become accustomed to. When we are changing and are not having those and haven't found village solutions to fill that physiological need, what they found was it is that same portion of the brain that is stimulated. So chronic isolation, chronic loneliness, same thing. Lose interest and initiative. We feel disagreeable. We're hyper-focused on things. We lose energy. And what do people attribute these behaviors to? Aging. Oh, well, you know, they're just getting old and they don't want to get up anymore. And it's just that darn aging. But it isn't aging. Just as dementia is not a normal part of aging, these kinds of physiological responses to very real mechanisms, and then what you add on top of it, in older adults who are experiencing chronic loneliness, as you saw, they die earlier and they have diarrhea. Do not quote me on that. There's no diarrhea link. I just said that for some reason. They have higher rates of dementia. Oh, she's leaving. She's like, oh, this is turning terrible. Totally don't blame you. I would do the same thing. Okay, now I want to talk to you to give an example. So I had the incredible fortune to work with a lot of great older adults. So I was a professor in geriatric medicine at UCI up north a little bit. And I found that a lot of our patients had this hidden problem of what was going on at home. And a lot of times it was financial exploitation. Sometimes it was situations of neglect or self-neglect. Sometimes a family member would be not only taking advantage of the finances of an older adult, but would be talking to them in ways that weren't good, were taking their medication or over-medicating. And this whole phenomena, elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So, like, pretty early on in my career there at the university, I started looking under a rock and seeing how common in our county, in Orange County, we are getting over 1,000 reports of elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation every month. The perpetrators are largely family members, although we have really organized, hardworking scam artists who are absolutely reaching out to all of to ourselves and to the people in our villages and to our parents. So this is the day that I met Harry, who not only let me share his story, but encouraged me. Harry's now in heaven, but every time I share his story, I think he would be happy to share it. So Harry, this is younger Harry. Harry went to Stanford University. He was a Green Beret. He was married for 61 years. He took care of his wife in her 9-year journey with Alzheimer's disease. He has an adult daughter, but they had falling out in their family because she was gay, and it was hard for the mother to accept her. And so basically the daughter moved away and was not in contact with Harry anymore. So when he was done with his caregiving role with his wife, he was in his nice home and he was quite isolated. So in the beginning, he walked to his club pool and he swam, but he's kind of by himself. And over time, the vultures swooped in, because that's what happens. The greatest risk factor of elder abuse is isolation. And so it happened in multiple forms, but the first form was that he needed a little bit of help, and so he hired a caregiver, and I am all for paid caregivers, believe me, but this paid caregiver wasn't with an agency and started really taking advantage of him financially, and also convinced him that they were kind of dating one another. And so that was the first. And then the second is that his phone started ringing off the hook with these friends who needed his help for different organizations and everything you can think of. So over the course of, it was 16 months, Harry, not cognitively impaired, brilliant, good man who served our country, lost almost $600,000. And he lost his home. And when I, at the time, was director of an elder abuse forensic center, went to meet him at the hospital, this was Harry. And so again, because of ageism and because of, you might think, oh, well, he was in his 80s, it was his time. But it wasn't his time. Thing is, what brought him to the hospital is that it was primarily dehydration, because he was ashamed when he realized, like, these are not my friends. This caregiver is not my girlfriend. It was, a horrible, horrible situation for him. So this is Harry, and this was actually, so after he got out of the hospital and before he had to move out of the home that he lost, which he didn't get the money back, despite, connecting with our elder abuse forensic center, because they're really difficult crimes to prosecute, and not that we shouldn't report them. You have to still report them to Adult Protective Services and to law enforcement. But having said that, given the ethical, legal, and sort of medical complexity, a lot of times we're not successful in righting these wrongs. But when he went back home, even though he had gone through this, I was sitting there talking to him to try to figure out about the next right steps in this dreadful journey. He got a call from the predators and was again being solicited on the telephone. And you see behind him on the computer, they were also going through the computer. But just as you think, oh, this is really taking a downer of a lecture, I'm going to talk about now it's going back up. So this is now about how Harry got his groove back. And this picture was taken after the picture that I showed you before. Yay! And I just took it with my regular phone, and it's just, that actually is in my backyard, and that's my dog's rear in the back. So, the baby is not mine, it's our next door neighbor's. So, the best way to connect, in my opinion, is in person. Like, I don't ever want to advocate or be a part of something that advocates replacing humans with robots. I don't ever want to think that there is anything more beautiful than connecting. In Harry's case, what we needed was to enable him to connect, because at the point after all this, he really had mobility limitations. He couldn't drive, so we were trying to think about how we can enable him to connect. And so we were doing things where we were having some volunteers go, and it worked, but it was difficult to make it scalable. So in Harry's case, and I have seen in cases of thousands of people, he got involved with, through me, Granddad. And so Granddad is a company that I didn't intend to start working for, but I fell in love with it so much that I did. And so I've been, for the past couple of years, full-time with them. And what it is about connecting humans. So it's not technology for technology's sake. It's not like washing our hands in the sink in the bathroom where you can like hardly get your hands to wash because like the monitor. But so the point is this: you need to have a way that engineers out all the frustration points. I think I made a slide for this. Yeah, I did. So we call them Poofs, points of frustration. So Poofs matter a lot. And in standard technology, and I'm not throwing any certain company out of the bus, I'm just calling it standard technology. Standard technology was not designed for my people, all of us who are aging. It was not designed for us. So connectivity is a problem. You got the Wi-Fi, you got all that stuff. Passwords are a pain in our rears. Charging can be tough. It was hard for Harry to get that little teeny tiny thing in there, and then you pull it and it comes out from the block. Font size is a problem for those of us with retinal detachments, and even the screen sensitivity. So if we live long enough into our 90s and beyond, our fingers lose moisture. It's moisture that activates these screens. The reason that it works is the moisture on my fingers. So I would have patients who would do the exact thing that their 27-year-old nephew was telling them to do, and it wasn't working, and they would feel, what's wrong with me? It's not what's wrong with you. It's wrong that we haven't designed things to work, to be frustration-free for every age. So you think about the part that is kind of like a Trojan horse for good that goes into the home of an older adult. You even engineered out, there's no on and off button. You just open it up and it's on. You just set it on this wireless charger and it works. It comes with all the connectivity, so you don't need internet, Wi-Fi, whatever. Yeah, my kids laugh that I work for a tech firm now because I hardly know the word for internet. But and then the other part that you need, you can't get these into the hands of everyone, so you use the ubiquitous, what everybody already has, and if it's working for them, great. So I want to, at this point, pause, because if you're like me, you're thinking, okay, you know what? I'm 82. I don't need your special Granddad. I'm fine. I got an awesome smartphone. My tablet is working great for me. My computer is great. Awesome. If it is working for you and you're loving it, don't get something different because it's working for you. Just keep using that. That's great. I'm thinking about the people that are frustrated by it. People who maybe haven't even gotten into this technology world because they're understandably frustrated by it. So anyway, the fact that all of our kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, neighbors have these to make them connect so that an older adult can be using something that works for them and connect directly to whoever they want to connect with, and equally important, not connect with who they don't want to connect with. We call it the circle of trust. So this is our founder, and so we're kind of a peanut butter and chocolate type of situation. His name is Scott Lean, and he was the Chief Information Officer at Bank of America. So in the 90s, do other people hear that? Oh, good. Yeah. Okay, for 4 days you've been hearing it. All right, so in the 90s, he created online banking for Bank of America, his team of 3,000. So he really knows technology and he really knows security, and he retired as somebody in that high position would, and then he lived in California and his beautiful mother lived in Iowa. And despite getting a great tablet and doing all these things, his brilliant mother was having a hard time, largely because she has hearing impairment, and so it wasn't working, and even the videos were hard. So from scratch, he and I partnered to bring gerontology and the humanistic part of aging with technology to fundamentally reinvent it. And the way that we did it was by listening. So here he is in the most beautiful candid shot. And this is Anna, who at that time of this picture was 114 years old. And she lived independently, and she didn't have any technology, nor did she want